Okay. Thank you all for dealing with our technical difficulties. I'm Becky. I am with Common Cause New York. I'm going to kick it over to Melody Lopez in 1 second, and we will get started. For press that is on the call, we will take question and answers at the end. So folks can put that in the chat or in the Q&A feature. Melody, over to you.
Thank you, Becky. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us to discuss the release of data from the Census Bureau yesterday and what it means for redistricting in New York State. I'm Melody Lopez. I'm the executive director of the New York State Civic Engagement Table. We partner with over 60 nonprofit organizations across New York State who are committed to working together to create a better democracy. While the New York Redistricting Commission has just concluded a series of listening tour hearings, the release of this data marks the official start of the redistricting process in our state. And the districts redraw this year will shape our lives and our communities for the next decade. It is critical for this process to be fair, equitable, and center the needs and interests of community members. We have speakers here today who will lay out the next critical steps of what is needed to ensure a fair, participatory, and nonpartisan redistricting process as we move forward. Today, we'll be joined by Ivan Garcia of Make the Road New York, Mimipierre Johnson from the Elmont Cultural Center, Susan Lerner of Common Cause New York, and Stephen Romoloski of the CUNY Mapping Service. As Becky mentioned, we'll then open it up for questions from folks on the call, or rather webinar. So first, I would like to invite Ivan Garcia, a national political director at Make the Road, to share his remarks.
Thank you, Melody, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. My name is Ivan Garcia. I am the Civic Engagement Director at Make the Road New York, the largest grassroots organization of immigrants and working class people of color in New York. We operate community centers in Brentwood, Long Island, Jackson Heights, Queens, Bushwick, Brooklyn, Port Richmond, Staten Island, and White Plains, Westchester. Increasing civic engagement is a critical part of our work. We conduct outreach continuously to ensure community members' voices are heard. In last year's census, we led in-person, phone, and digital outreach that reached hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers. Our members participated in that process to make certain that our communities receive both adequate resources and representation. To achieve such representation, we need a redistricting process that is transparent, fair, and reflects the geographic realities and growing numbers of our communities. The redistricting process should not be about political interests. It should be an opportunity to draw fair maps that gives representation to communities that have been underrepresented for years, and give us equal voice on key issues that affect us, like housing, healthcare, and workers' rights. There are several things that we learned from the census data that was released yesterday. For starters, communities of color and immigrant communities have grown tremendously across New York. The Latinx community alone saw a 15.5 increase across the state. Asian Americans also saw a big increase of over 36% across the state. In several counties where we work, if it weren't for the population gains amongst Latinx and AAPI residents, the county's population would have declined. This means these places would have been likely to lose representation without this Latinx and AAPI population growth. For example, in Nassau County, while we only saw a total population increase of a little bit over 56,000, we saw the Latinx community grow by 31.3% since 2010, or in raw numbers, a little bit over 61,000. The Asian community also grew by 60.4%, or 61,859. In Westchester, we saw the Latinx population increase by 62,299 since 2010, and the Asian community saw an increase of 13,991. At the same time, Westchester only grew by 55,000, a little bit over 55,000 residents. In another key geographic area of ours, Staten Island, we saw the Latinx community grow by 19.6%, or 15,909 residents. The Asian American community also grew by 68.6%, or 24,115. At the same time, the total population in Staten Island only grew by a little bit over 27,000. In Queens and Brooklyn, we saw strong growth among Latinx and AAPI communities, and this should translate into more representation. In the last Senate map communities of color were effectively disenfranchised, both through cracking of Long Island and through high population deviations that concentrated more voters in New York City communities with high Black, brown, and immigrant populations. Our members and allies organized to stop this injustice, but those in power ignored us. This must be fixed in the next map. We are still in we have already offered initial testimony to the Redistricting Commission, and today we're just here to reiterate those same recommendations. Respect one person, one vote, where immigrant, Black, and brown communities have grown, and distribution and drawing of districts should reflect that. The commission must respect best practice, equal population standards, and not concentrate higher numbers of voters into districts with high populations of color, also known as packing. No abusive line drawing, so we must avoid the cracking and packing, which disenfranchises communities, as we saw on Long Island, where state Senate map makers drew a straight line through Brentwood, currently Senate Districts 3 and 4. Respect political subdivisions and communities of interest. We saw firsthand how Brentwood was sliced in half and other communities of color were manipulated for political reasons. Lines should respect other political boundaries and communities of interest. Compactness and making sure that they are contiguous, not like we've seen in prior rounds. No partisan gerrymandering. This process should center the needs of the community, not political parties. Public participation and transparency. There must be robust opportunities for engagement, especially once draft maps have been drawn. To ensure this process is fair and functional, we have also joined with 50 community organizations across the state to support the redistricting ballot question on November's ballot. A yes vote will require the state to count residents regardless of immigration status, should the federal census fail to do so. Require that incarcerated persons be counted at the place of their last residence for redistricting instead of where they are incarcerated. Eliminate the different vote thresholds for adopting redistricting plans, depending on which party controls legislative chambers, and cap the number of state senators at 63. We continue the politics as usual process of drawing maps. Our communities will continue to suffer and have to wait another 10 years for a chance to get fairer maps. We urge the commission to adopt best practices to make sure our communities are heard. And we urge voters to support the ballot question to improve the redistricting process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. We'll next turn it to Mimipierre Johnson, the president of the Elmont Cultural Center.
Thank you, Melody. Again, my name is Mimipierre Johnson from Elmont Cultural Center in Elmont, New York. You know, when you hear the things that has been said already, I want to give you the face and the experience of what happens when gerrymandering happens, right? So it's gerrymandering season, I like to say. When I think about community work and civic engagement, census and redistricting have been my favorite topic to educate for the past 10 years. The fight to vote, register folks, and stay engaged in our political system, as someone who was personally affected along with my neighbors in the worst way in Elmont in the last redistricting cycle, there is absolutely no way that we can stay out of this fight for fair maps. When you talk about my street, that was divided into 2 election districts. So, you know, on paper, you would think that Elmont has such great representation because we have 2 or 3 of every level of government, but that is just the secret tools that is used to just separate, crack, and pack us and take away our voices. So I think fair maps mean fair elections, community engagement, with my neighbors. For far too long, we have been polite about our voices being silenced through the redistricting process, through political shenanigans, which is what I think this is sometimes. I believe it is time for us to be loud and rude, because I want to be able to speak to my neighbors on funding, road repairs, businesses, and a host of other issues that matters to us, and not have to worry about dealing with the schedules of 3 different senators and dealing with 3 different office staff. Because in Elmont, that's what we have. We have a senator that has about 80 homes, and we have half of Elmont with 1 senator and the other half with the other senator. And so this is also on the federal level. Our Queen's congressman is just that, a Queen's congressman, right? And so even on the local level, you have legislators, right? We have more than 1 legislator because of the way that we were cracked. And dealing with all of those staff when you want to talk about one issue. Why do we have to do that? Because my neighbor across the street from me, we don't have the same senator. And so my neighbors across the major street does not have the same legislator or does not have the same council person. So when you do that to a community, we have to fight harder in order just to get the things that we're supposed to get, right? We can not allow our voices to be weakened again. We must make sure we have community input. We must make it fair for all who want to speak to have the opportunity in a fair way, unlike 2011. Boundaries of a map should be contiguous, and the boundaries are not should not be something that the politicians or political tools are used to stay in power, but contiguous districts where neighborhoods are well represented, and that we have fair and thriving communities, especially our immigrants. And the Culture Center, we work with so many different immigrants who does not have the understanding of our political system or the resources that they need. So when we work in these communities, we are encouraging people to participate. We are encouraging people to understand that we have a fair system here. We have a system that you can participate in. But then when every 10 years, we have to fight to make sure that we're not lying to them. So we're asking the commission to make sure that the work that we do is not in vain, and that you have a fair map so that we all can participate in this system that we have, that we talk about, and that we work for. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mimi. Now I would like to invite Susan Lerner, Executive Director of Common Cause New York, to join us with her remarks.
Thanks so much, Melody, and thanks to Mimi and Ivan for laying out the urgency of this situation, because in our democracy, every vote counts and every voice matters. Now that we have the preliminary data, we need everyone in our community to raise their voice for fair maps and participate in this year's redistricting process. Here at Common Cause New York, we're engaged in leading fair mapping, community mapping workshops, helping communities envision for themselves where their community boundaries are and providing them with the skills necessary to access public domain mapping tools through the internet to be able to visualize where their community boundaries actually exist. And it's imperative that the redistricting process really hears those voices and incorporates the stories of the communities. We are in a situation where our history regarding drawing maps is really very checkered. At the federal level, we need the For the People Act as our best chance to end partisan and racial gerrymandering across the country, to make sure that the voices of everyday people are heard loud and clear. But here in New York State, we're encouraging all voters to vote yes on the ballot amendments this November, because that has the power to improve our redistricting process. The amendment is not perfect. We are ultimately going to need a fully independent citizen-led process, but the ballot amendment, as I've said, is going to improve our redistricting process. Right now, we're in a situation because of the pandemic and the lateness of the census data, where the calendar and the requirements of the Constitution are out of line. And also because we now have a June primary. So the amendment will help to realign that time frame. Right now, I want to remind everybody that September 15th is the last day that the New York Redistricting Commission has to draft maps, and release them to the public. Starting in mid-October, the commission has to hold public meetings to gather feedback. And on November 2nd, of course, the new redistricting changes amendment will appear on the ballot. The amendment's going to rectify the redistricting process in New York. It's going to move up the timeline for redistricting, cap the number of state senators at 63, affirm the total population is the basis for districts, require the state to count all residents, including people who are residents but not citizens, should the federal census fail to do so, and require in our state constitution that incarcerated persons be counted at the place of their last residence for redistricting. It's going to remove the block on border requirement of highly technical complication for map drawers for state Senate districts. We've already done away with it for the Assembly. And it's going to change the vote threshold to a uniform 60% for adopting maps, irrespective of which party controls any chamber. And then if the amendment passes, it's going to set January 1st for the date that the legislature, that the commission has to set forth the maps, and for the legislature to approve them, giving January 1 as the date where the commission would be required to submit, I'm sorry, let me restate that, January 1 for the commission, the legislature to approve or disapprove the map, and then the commission submitting a second proposed set of maps by January 15th, an adjustment that's required because of our June primary, to be sure that candidates who want to run when they start to petition in March know what district they are seeking to represent, which I think is an extremely important change. We know from our experience at Common Cause New York that how the maps are drawn has a tremendous impact. I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to help draw a fair and nonpartisan congressional map in the last redistricting cycle, and that made New York a swing state for Congress, having a real impact on the choices on which voters had and the representation which they got in Congress. So this is an extremely important process. We all, as voters, have a say on the November amendment, but most importantly, as residents, we have a way to participate through a community mapping process to have our voices heard and to provide the commission with the kind of information that they can use to be sure that our communities are fairly represented. The census shows the gorgeous diversity of our state, and we need to be sure that the map's fairly represented. Melody, back to you.
Thank you very much, Susan. And finally, I'd like to invite Steve Romoloski, Director of CUNY Mapping Service at the Center for Urban Research at the Graduate Center, to provide his remarks as well.
Sure, thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this important issue. So just to, I guess, give some background about what we at the Center for Urban Research at the CUNY Graduate Center have been looking at in terms of the new census data and redistricting is we, of course, have decades of experience analyzing and working with census data, making it available and helping interpret it for other researchers and the public in general. and excuse me, including journalists. And we very much plan to continue doing that. We've started to look closely at the data from yesterday and what some of the initial trends and changes reflect. But of course, as the topic of this discussion today is about the next immediate use of census data, which is redistricting. Now that we know at the congressional level what the apportionment is, that New York State will have 26 instead of 27 congressional districts, and then also for state legislative districts. Our approach as far as redistricting goes is we are not planning to do any map drawing. Others are doing that really well, and we don't feel a need to duplicate those efforts, but we very much want to help organizations make the best use of census data and other data in terms of understanding the current district boundaries and how that reflects or does not their local communities, and what that might mean for proposed districts. So one thing we've done is we've developed an interactive online map at redistrictingnu.org that shows, and we just updated it yesterday with the new census data. It shows the for each congressional and state legislative district nationwide, how much the current population is above or below the statewide district average, or sometimes referred to as the ideal district size. So for Congress, the policy is really to make sure that the districts that are drawn anew are within 1% of that so-called ideal population size. State legislative districts, there's a little bit more leeway, some more discretion, but still the idea is to try to achieve the goal of population equality. And so our map helps you visualize that. It makes it very easy to just find your current district. You may not even know what the current district boundaries look like, so you can find that out very easily, and then show the information for how much it might need to shrink and how much it might need to expand, and to begin the conversation about and to begin thinking about what that might mean when the lines are actually redrawn. And to the extent that you can use that information to get involved with other organizations, some of which are here on this call, to actually help redraw the lines. You could use that to further that goal. We also soon will have a New York State version of that map that will make it very easy. It will show all of the information about the population data, but it will mainly be designed to make it very easy to see what the current district lines look like and what the proposed district plans look like, whether that's from the New York State Redistricting Commission or from other stakeholders, again, several of whom are on the call now. We did this after the 2010 census. It was very helpful, very successful. Journalists especially really liked it because it made it really easy to see what we're talking about when these district plans start being developed. And so we'll have that online soon. We'll also be working very closely with other organizations, including the groups here and the New York Immigration Coalition, to help them evaluate the districts from the perspective of population changes. And one thing just from a substantive perspective to think about is, to leave it with you, is that the population data released yesterday, going back to this, the key issue of at the congressional level that we have one fewer congressional district in New York State. We will have, and so we need to draw congressional district maps that reflect that. When you look at the population numbers released yesterday, you can see very clearly that even though there was an increase, looking at the broad regions of the state, there were population increases on Long Island, substantial population increase in New York City. And also, when you look at the upstate region overall, there was a population increase. But because of the really tremendous population growth in New York City, the pressure will be downstate in terms of how the district lines get drawn. And it looks pretty clear if you just look at the population numbers, that there would be one fewer congressional district in the upstate region writ large. I know it's controversial sometimes how you define what upstate is, but basically anything above New York City for the moment is what I'm considering upstate. And that population grew a little bit, but not enough to sustain the current number of congressional districts that are covering that area, roughly 12. It looks pretty clear that it would have to go to 11. Where the lines are redrawn and how that shakes out is an open question, and organizations that are on the call today will be involved in trying to make that a fair process. And again, you can use our map to help begin to understand what the lay of the land looks like as far as those population changes. So I'll leave it there, and I'm happy to answer questions or discuss further. Thanks.